The paper my colleagues and I will discuss about is Public Financing of Innovation, New Questions. It was published in the Oxford Review of Economics Policy in 2017. The authors of the paper are Mariana Francesca Mazzucato and Gregor Semeniuk. The first one is a professor at University College of London, and she is the founder and director of the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. In 2013, she published The Entrepreneurial State. In her book, she criticizes the idea of the state as a static bureaucratic organization only needed to fix market failures. She mentions a number of case studies to show that the high-risk investments are being made by the state before the private sector gets involved. Gregor Semeniuk, instead, is an honorary senior research associate at the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose at University College London. His research focuses on the energy requirements of global economic growth and on the policy-induced structural change required for the transition to a low-carbon economy. The aim of the paper is to contrast the market failure theory and to show how successful policies that have led to radical innovations have been more about market shaping and creating through direct public financing rather than market fixing. The evidence is provided by looking at the recent history of public financing in the information technology and pharmaceutical sectors in the US and at the green redirection of the entire economy. As regards the structure, the paper is divided into 5 parts. After a brief introduction, Section 2 confronts market failure arguments with the recent history of financing innovation, especially in information technology and pharmaceutical sectors in the US. Section 3 deals with the mission-oriented role of the state across the whole innovation chain. In Section 4, the evidence of market-making activity of public funds in the renewable energy sector is highlighted. Finally, in Section 5, the authors discuss future research questions and caveats regarding the possibility also of government failure. Schumpeter's focus on innovation made him place finance at the center of his analysis. According with the authors, he did not, however, look at the problem of what kind of finance is the best to serve the purposes of innovation. What we know about the relationship between finance and innovation is that financial institutions are central to innovation because they provide access to high-risk capital for firms interested in engaging with new technologies, from IT to nanotech and emerging green tech industry. Innovation is highly uncertain because of the high risk, as long lead times, and this implies that the kind of finance must be patient, is cumulative and is collective because of the variety of public and private sources. These 4 characteristics reveal much about the kind of finance that is needed. Recent literature has highlighted how private finance has increasingly retreated from financing productive activities. One of the reasons the private sector has been disinvesting in the difficult R side of the research and development is its increasing short-termism. This is caused by corporate governance structures that prioritize quarterly returns and the pressure to maximize shareholder value. Other authors have concentrated on the problems associated with short-term finance in science-based industries. They are better served by long-term finance. Indeed, companies can learn more in areas that will require much trial and error. This debate about the sort of finance is relevant for the policymakers addressing the so-called grand societal challenges such as climate change, natural resource scarcity, aging, and improved healthcare. For all these reasons, the type of finance that innovators receive is not neutral and can affect both the rate and the direction of innovation. The idea that the state is at best a fixer of markets has its roots in neoclassical economic theory, which sees competitive markets as bringing about optimal outcomes if left to themselves. This theory justifies government intervention in the economy only if there are explicit market failures which arise from the presence of positive externalities, negative externalities, and incomplete information. But the recent history of capitalism depicts a different story. The state has often been responsible for actively shaping and creating markets and systems, not just fixing them. A decentralized network of strategic, mission-oriented agencies was crucial to the public funding. Mission statements can help direct public funds in ways that are more targeted than simply helping all small and medium-sized enterprises. Some of the key public agencies in the U.S. innovation landscape include the National Institutions of Health, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. They were active across the entire innovation chain, and they have been mission-driven, that is, have directed their actions based on the need to solve big problems. They actively created new technological landscapes. Missions are problem-specific, whether for military purposes or for achieving targets in areas such as energy or health. Some examples of mission statements are illustrated. The NASA's one deals with advances in technology, aeronautics, and space exploration. The DARPA's mission is related to technologies for national security. The NIH's mission is to enhance health, lengthen life, and reduce illness and disability. Is there enough patient finance to fund long-term investments in the real economy, and in particular for high-risk societal challenges? To answer this question, we can learn from the lessons of previous technological landscape, where different forms of public funds have been essential in providing the high-risk and early funding. In the case of information technology, an example is provided by those technologies that have made Apple's iProducts, iPhone, iPad, smart. They were initially funded by different mission-oriented public sector institutions: the Internet by DARPA, the GPS by the US Navy, the touchscreen display by the Central Intelligence Agency, and the voice-activated personal assistant Siri by DARPA again.
An alternative framework for financing innovation. A better understanding of a mission-oriented role of the state and its entrepreneurial activities can provide key insights for understanding the type of finance needed, especially in the case of transformative innovation that can be used to address nowadays social challenges. Next are presented two useful frameworks to rethink the role of the state in fostering innovation, so to develop a transformational market creating shaping policy approach. The first is the mission-oriented innovation policy framework. This is a type of broad-based innovation policy that aims to achieve specific objectives. Such policies, by definition, give explicit technological and sectoral direction to achieve the mission. There is a comparison to make. In a market failure framework, ex-ante analysis aims to estimate benefits and costs, including those associated with government failures, while ex-post analysis seeks to verify whether the estimates were correct and a market failure successfully addressed. Instead, a mission-oriented framework requires continuous and dynamic monitoring and evaluation throughout the innovation policy process. So the state must therefore be able to learn from past experiences in a mission-oriented innovation policy. Systemic mission-oriented policy must be based on a sound and clear analysis and foresight in order to scrutinize future opportunities and also identify how strengths may be used to overcome weaknesses and challenges. Mission-oriented policies can therefore be defined as systemic public policies that draw on frontier knowledge to attain specific goals or big science deployed to meet big problems. The archetypal historical mission is NASA's putting men on the moon. The current active role of the public sector in facing renewable energy investments can be seen as a new mission in relation to the green economy. Other new missions include addressing such grand societal challenges like aging, demographic crisis, inequality, and youth unemployment, all challenges that have entered innovation policy agenda as key justification for action, providing strategic direction for funding policies and innovation efforts. To define the notion of the entrepreneurial state, we can look at studies in industry dynamics that have documented a weak relationship between entry of new firms into industries and the current level of profits in those industries. Usually, business tend to enter new sectors only after the high risk and uncertainty has been absorbed by the public sector, especially in areas of high capital intensity. For example, this has been the case with H revolution or nanotechnology. In innovation policy, the state not only crowds in business investment but also dynamizes it, creating the vision, the mission, and the plan. An entrepreneurial state is not only the risk but envisages the risk space and operates boldly and effectively within it. An entrepreneurial state does not foresee what the details of the innovation are, but it knows a general area that is ripe for development or where pushing the boundaries of knowledge are desirable. The state engages with night and uncertainty for the exploration and production of new products that lead to economic growth. The state has been entrepreneurial when it has taken the lead by formulating a vision of a new era like the Internet or the genetic sequence. Then public financing of innovation comprises investing in the earliest stage research and development, creating and funding networks that bring together business, academia, and finance, funding high-risk ventures, and investing in high-risk demonstration and deployment. So, a theoretical framework of public innovation would emphasize the influence that public institutions take on the course of transformative innovation and then their active involvement in financing of that innovation along the entire innovation chain. Insights about market shaping and creating role of public actors are crucial for today's social challenges like the green one. Nowadays, climate change requires both a transformation of the energy system on a short-term scale and both a progress to replace greenhouse gas emitting fuels with a renewable power supply. A bottleneck is finance for renewable energy innovation since it has been very difficult, especially for private sectors, due to the competition from incumbent fossil fuels. And profits depend on public subsidies like tax credit, power purchase agreement, and so on. The International Renewable Energy Agency has estimated that a 9% annual growth rate in investment over the next 15 years is required to keep global warming to a 2 degrees temperature rise. The agency does not specify the sources of financing but suggests policymakers to play an enabling role. From a market failure perspective, climate change damages are a negative externality of energy production. In this sense, the carbon taxes and R&D spending are recommended to start the private innovation machine, rather than within the public sectors, which is much more active in directly financing renewable energy innovation, creating markets and thus taking out risks. Now are presenting three areas to know how the public actors' behavior is characteristic of a market shaping role. The first area is the entire innovation chain. Public actors in renewable energy are active and distributed along the innovation chain. In this sense, government agencies are involved in R&D with around 50% of renewable energy sector R&D spending originating in the public sector, according to the Bloomberg New Energy Finance estimate. Government activity is also widespread at the demonstration level of new technologies. At the subsequent market creation and deployment stage, another variety of public actors are active, ranging from governmental agencies and investment funds, through huge amounts invested by state banks to state-owned utilities. In fact, at the deployment stage, policy control organizations are now responsible for almost half of global asset finance for utility-scale power plants. Finally, this public activity along the chain is completed with finance from the world's 31 export credit agency, according to OECD 2016, that guarantee payment for national champions when they develop risky renewable energy projects abroad, financed by foreign capital. The figure here proposed summarizes the previous discussion. The data show that this variety of public actors is non-neutral, but gives direction to innovation. Public actors invest in portfolios that favor one or another technology. So, the final consideration reached is that it emerges that in countries with a strong renewable energy sector, public organizations were active along the innovation chain, which is typical of the market-shaping behavior of the public actors we previously discussed.
Innovation in the energy sector has historically been driven by missions, and the most significant one right now is that of climate change, with the intention to try to limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius. At the Paris Conference of the Parties of 2015, 20 governments presented the goal to double their national R&D spending on clean energy over the next 5 years. But this mission was also going beyond R&D. The investments were not only meant to correct market failure, but rather achieving the goal of halting global warming by supporting change and encouraging and developing a sustainable energy supply. So here on this table on the left, we can see that the technologies listed are ordered according to an increasing degree of technology and market riskiness from left to right, showing how publicly owned utilities take on considerable risk by investing in offshore wind. So in previous research, Mazzucato and Semyonuk, they showed that the risk ordering is ordinal and suggests that onshore wind is not riskier than any other technology investment in average, and that according to this measure, public actors hold on average a much riskier portfolio than private actors in asset finance. But with this paper, they pushed this research one step further and analyzed how high risk-taking by private actors is correlated with co-investment by public actors. So basically, they singled out investments into high-risk area only. And we can see on the figure on the right here that private investments into high-risk assets are correlated with the participation of public actors in private high-risk finance. And the table plots the share of these high-risk funds that are invested into an asset in which at least one public actor is also investing. So we can see in 2004 only about 1% of private funds went into high-risk projects, and of these only 18% had a public co-investor. Both shares increased over time. So we can see in 2014 around 10% of private funds went towards high-risk investments, while the share of these high-risk projects co-funded by public organizations stood at above 50%. Then when public actors have participated in high-risk deals, they have tended to finance on average between 30 and 50% of the deal's volume. So as more public actors were stepping forward to finance assets, the more the private side became willing to invest in the higher risk deployment. And this strong positive correlation between public participation and private risk-taking suggests that the public sector's desire for high-risk investments was important for a significant share of implementation of those technologies that basically have fastest to go in terms of innovation through learning by doing. This figure then shows how the grants for renewable energy research spiked in 2009 and then dropped back to almost pre-crisis level in 2012. So the patterns seen in public financing for innovation in renewable energy and clean tech more generally are very far from the indirect policies recommended by a market failure approach. And despite this massive intervention, even the existing activities have been insufficient to mobilize the finances needed for achieving the mission of limiting global warming. So even more active public sector involvement in financing innovation is needed. It is of course possible to argue that the public financing prevents overall financing as opposed to boosting it, but it also seems risky not to explore the possibility that the public actors may be an important driver of the transformation of how we produce energy. So the focus of this article has been the strategic role of public financing of innovation and the way it can shape and create markets. This process has three key features, which are investing along the entire innovation chain, the mission-oriented nature of the agencies involved, and the lead risk-taking role. So looking at these three features of the system helps to see the limits of the traditional market failure framework. And as an example of transformative innovation needed to confront a societal challenge, the authors applied this perspective to the emerging clean technology sector. It also evidenced the fact that public financing must be proactive and bold, creating directions and transcending the role envisaged by the market. This is even more important for contemporary societal challenges, where the need for transformative innovation is particularly pressing. And public organizations financing innovation need to be mission-oriented and entrepreneurial, and even if they are active to a certain extent, we saw that it is not enough. The author underlined that a visible public hand is required that must be distributed across the whole innovative chain through different actors. To be incentivized, the green investments would need to be crowded in by public funding, because there is not yet a market that can work efficiently with private actors at its center. And to this statement, the paper presents two caveats. So the first one is that there is no automatism whereby public involvement in financing innovation leads to superior outcomes. Because from one side, there are public investments that have led to important successes, like the internet and the GPS, but there are also government investments that ended in failure, like, for example, the Concorde aircraft. But it's obvious that as innovation is intrinsically uncertain, occasional failure is part of this journey. The second caveat is the motivations behind public sector financing. So there are many problems associated with the government failure that arise from rent-seeking when public officials have some private interests. It could happen that financing for innovation goes to those that are not the best innovators, but are rather those with the best connections to the public funding agencies. And while the authors don't deny this problem, they also explore a different aspect of it, posing the question whether rent-seeking is more problematic with a weak passive state than with a strong one. If the state is described as simply fixing markets, it may over time become less confident and more easily corruptible by different actors, who can then convince policymakers to hand out favors in order to increase their private wealth. So, to conclude, this article has emphasized on the need of innovation for patient strategic capital that is lacking in the private sector, and on how the impact of mission-oriented public investment along the entire innovation chain and across the phases of the business cycle is something that the green tech industry can learn from the experiences in sectors such as biotech and ECT, so information and communication technology. The theoretical contribution given at the end is that economic policy should be more about market shaping and creating than just market or system fixing. Thank you for your kind attention.